the President of Rising Global Peace Forum, Your Excellencies, former presidents of your countries. I think we have two former presidents here. Chancellor of the University, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me express my sincere appreciation to the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations for inviting me to this year's Rising Global Peace Forum to share with you my thoughts on global peace, security, and stability. I have spent most of my adult life championing the empowerment of women, girls, and children. My mission in life is to assist women and youth gain social and political empowerment through education and entrepreneurship. That is why when I received this invitation to join you and speak on the topic of empowering women towards peace, I did not hesitate to accept. The importance of peace, security, and stability in the world cannot be overemphasized. These are the necessary prerequisites for political, social, and economic development of any society, from the family level, community, nation, continent, and the entire world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, people caught up in conflict cycle are deprived of basic services and human rights, such as health, education, and participation in economic activity. Millions of innocent people become refugees in foreign countries while others are displaced internally. In all these cycles of conflict, it is women and children who suffer most. It is imperative, therefore, that while the international community seeks to end violence and armed conflicts across the world, women must always be placed at the center of these efforts. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that women contribute meaningfully towards the attainment of peace, deliberate efforts must be made to ensure that as many girls and women as possible acquire formal and advanced education. According to UNICEF, girls' education is both an intrinsic right and a critical path to reaching other social development objectives. Providing girls with an education helps break the cycle of poverty. Educated women are less likely to marry early and against their will, less likely to die in childbirth, more likely to have healthy babies, and are more likely to send their children to school. When all children have access to a quality education rooted in human rights and gender equality, it creates a ripple effect of opportunity that influences generations to come. Indeed, educated women are likely to resist being used as weapons of war and sex by armed groups, as we have often witnessed in Africa. Educated women can join men on the peace negotiation and mediation table and make informed contributions towards resolving differences. Most importantly, in the heat of armed conflicts, it is uneducated women with babies on their back that are always caught up, while educated women find their way out of conflict zones and carry on with their lives elsewhere. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we also need to create an enabling environment where women have easy access to economic opportunities. Poverty, I believe, and this is my opinion, has been most crucial catalyst for armed conflict, especially in Africa. Social, political, and economic imbalances and injustices have led to the have-nots to forcibly demand their equal share of the national cake. To address the ever-widening social and economic gap between the rich and the poor, we must design national legislation, policies, and programs that deliberately address the many challenges that women face to achieve economic empowerment. I believe that agriculture, especially in Africa, provides the easiest opportunity for women to achieve quick and meaningful economic empowerment. Concerted efforts must therefore be made to assist women become large-scale farmers. Women must have easy access to enough land, and this is an issue, again, that is causing a lot of conflict on the continent. Women must have loans for farm inputs and improved seeds, extension services and technical support, modern farming equipment, and more access to national, regional, and international markets, among others. Women must engage in agribusiness and agro-processing, where they do not only sell produce as raw materials, but they add value to it and earn more income. When this is achieved, women will not only be able to feed their families, their communities, and nation, they will also create employment for millions of idle youth, men and women. Idleness, hopelessness, and lack of sustainable jobs are some of the main reasons people join armed conflict. In Africa, it is only women with adequate economic means that can successfully compete in politics, which has traditionally been the man's domain. When women have reliable economic means, they can join politics and go all the way to parliament, cabinet, and of course, state house, like in my case, where they can make crucial decisions on peace and security and other vital decisions to affect the masses. Women with economic means can become, yes, lawmakers and sit right in parliament, where they can contribute to the adoption of laws that encourage peace and a coexistence among nations. In Africa today, youth with an average of 25 years comprise 60% of the population. The average age of political leaders and presidents is 65 years old. With the digital age revolution, youth in Africa have taken advantage of the social media to demand governance, accountability, and transparency from political leaders. Leadership is now being redefined, where leaders have to exercise their power at the pleasure of the people that gave them the mandate in the first place. Conflicts emerge where the aging leaders are insensitive to the demands and aspirations of the youthful population. It is where the leaders' insensitivity to the demands of the youth that has given rise to armed conflicts in some parts of Africa, because the youth have become hopeless. The recent upspring and other cases are good examples. It is imperative to support the participation of women in leadership. I know from experience, as a leader myself, that when women are leaders, they pay much attention to social issues. They are servants first and leaders second. Women leaders are always willing to engage in dialogue and mediation, where political and other differences emerge. Indeed, women leaders are less corrupt and risk takers, where the majority of the people stand to benefit. Women leaders focus much on fellow women and children. They make sure that as many qualified women as possible are appointed to strategic decision-making positions in mainstream civil service, boards of public enterprise, and private sector. In the case of Malawi, when I became president, I appointed Malawi's first Chief Justice, female, head of civil service, Solicitor General, two governors of the Reserve Bank, Deputy Inspector General of Police. For the first time, sometimes the three of us, head of civil service, Chief Justice, and myself, sat over a cup of tea running matters of state in the country of Malawi. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, women leaders prefer dialogue and avoid conflict. Women leaders strongly believe in engagement and consultation on the best approach to resolving differences. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I recall that by the time I assumed the office of president in Malawi in 2012, the country was polarized on tribal and regional lines, where most of key government positions were mostly occupied by one tribe. The country had poor relations with our neighbors and our development partners. As president, I adopted an inclusive and participatory policy where I appointed an all-inclusive cabinet. I also engaged all stakeholders, opposition leaders, the clergy, leaders of civil society, traditional chiefs, and academia in consultations on key and important national policy issues. For example, I took an inclusive consultative approach on the lake border dispute between Malawi and Tanzania and the fight against theft of public funds, where I engaged with members of opposition, political parties, faith-based organizations, and the civil society to come to a peaceful conclusion. I strongly also believe that women's access to new information and communication technologies, ICTs, is another form of empowerment that would help them contribute meaningfully to bringing about peace, security, and stability in Africa. Instant messaging on social media, forums such as Facebook, Twitter, and blogs have a huge potential to influence human behavior. The internet has become the easiest source of information and interaction, where people are even able to share messages, pictures, and videos, and transaction of various business, including banking and trade. Deliberate efforts must be put in place for women who are naturally compassionate and peace-loving to have access to computers, mobile phones, and internet, to become active participants in various cyber discussions, including conflict resolution. Finally, on this one, all this talk about the empowerment of women to contribute to peace would yield nothing if national governments do not take deliberate efforts to include women in peace efforts. In short, we need strong political will at national leadership level, with much results in incorporating the woman's voice at all costs to realize genuine peace resolution in conflict-prone territories. Recently, the United Nations bemoaned the low number of women military peacekeepers, which effectively means women's interests are not adequately represented in conflict and most conflict situations. The UN says these low numbers underline the low participating levels of women in the armed forces of countries that contribute personnel to peacekeeping forces. In Denmark, one of the first countries to adopt a national action plan to implement Resolution 1325, women make up only 5% of Danish military forces, and a similar percentage in peacekeeping missions. It is imperative, therefore, that governments recruit more women in security and law enforcement to address sexual violence in communities and in armed conflict and post-conflict situations. The UN Security Council 1325 on Women and Peace and Security, adopted in the year 2000, reaffirms the important role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflict, peace negotiations, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict construction. It also stresses the importance of equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance, promotion of peace and security. These and other women, peace and security resolutions affirm women must not only be protected from war and the violence unleashed thereby, but they must be seen as agents of conflict prevention, of peacekeeping and peacemaking, mediators and as reconcilers in peace building in post-conflict. Women have such untapped potential to be effective participants, key decision makers, and beneficiaries of peace. The international community must help women to use their potential to create a more peaceful world. United Nations has a case study in Liberia where they have empowered women to be genuine agents of peace and stability. Women there have devised the Peace Heart mechanism, in which local women leaders mediate and resolve local and domestic conflict before they escalate into violence. In the Peace Heart, women leaders are also referring survivors to services, liaising with local police through a mobile phone hotline, and engaging in local peace-building efforts. In South Sudan, I'm told, the UN Women has supported in select communities women's empowerment centers where sexual and gender-based violence prevention activities and referrals take place. In Liberia, Timor-Leste, Uganda, and Haiti, UN Women is supporting local organizations to build referral services and networks for survivors, such as reproductive health care, access to justice, livelihood support, and psychological counseling. In a speech at the high-level forum on the culture of peace in New York in September 2014, the UN Women Deputy Director General, Ms. Puri, said, and I quote, "The role and contribution of women and youth to the culture of peace is not only important because women and young people represent the majority of the global population. There are 600 million adolescent girls in the developing world, and the global population is experiencing a youth bulge. But also because women and young people are key drivers of the radical change of mindsets, institutions, and cultures that we seek." End of quote. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, while I believe that all I have said before now leads towards women's participation in the attainment of peace on the continent of Africa and other places, I also believe that political will is key to peace and security, especially on the continent of Africa. Before I give my final recommendations in this regard, allow me to share my personal experience on challenges and successes on my way to leadership, because this is what I was requested to do in my presentation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have been very fortunate in my life that the issues that I have championed originated from personal experience. Growing up, a very good friend of mine failed to go to secondary school because the family could not raise the $6 that she required, in spite of the fact that she was brighter than me, but the family could not afford $6. I went on all the way to State House, and Chris, my best friend, is where I left her. This is the first time at 14 years old that I came face to face with the injustice of this world. Therefore, I decided at age 14 that I will send as many girls as possible to school when I grow up. I have been fortunate that I have built 3 schools in Malawi, and I've been fortunate that I have sent 3,500 girls to school. And I've also been fortunate that right now I'm sponsoring 500 students in our universities, 23 of them in our medical school. So 2 semesters away from here, from today, we shall have 23 more medical doctors in Malawi. Secondly, in 1984, giving birth to my 4th-born child, I suffered what they call postpartum hemorrhage. Our distinguished nurses and doctors are present here. So I was bleeding to death. Bleeding after childbirth is one of the leading causes of death in my country and in Africa in general. But I was fortunate because my husband brought to the ward the only gynecologist we had in town to save my life. And I woke up and started to ask what was happening to other women that were not as privileged as myself. And I have taken maternal mortality as one of the fights on my hands. When I was president, I set up what I called the Presidential Initiative on Maternal Health and Safe Motherhood. And in 24 months, built holding shelters to ensure that women go to clinics and wait there for labor, and engaged the traditional leaders who ensured that nobody delivers in a village anymore, and banned the delivering of traditional birth attendants, and was able in that period to reduce maternal death from 675 per 100,000 to 460. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I was married at 21. By age 26, I had 3 children and stayed in an abusive marriage for 10 years. And so I know a lot about physical abuse, emotional abuse, and walked out of that marriage when women in Africa didn't walk out of any marriage. And made up my mind at that point that I shall spend my entire life fighting domestic violence if I can help it. And then I was fortunate, and I'm pleased to report, that when I was Minister of Women and Children, I championed the passing of the Domestic Violence Bill. In the year 2012, I became President of Malawi. But the journey to that leadership was not easy. I was Minister of Women and Children 2004 to 2006, Foreign Minister from 2006 to 2009. The President then asked me to stand with him and campaign with him and stand for elections, because in Malawi, you have to be elected Vice President alongside your President. So we both were elected together. And he told the nation that for the first time you shall have a Vice President that is female, but I shall also groom her to take over from me when I leave. Unbeknown to me that he was lying, that all he wanted was the women's vote. And women in Malawi got excited. Because I'm a grassroots person myself, I've spent my adult life working at grassroots. We were elected together and we won the election by 75%. I went into my state house, and 2 weeks later, the president told me that he had changed his mind, that he was not going to groom me anymore, that people had advised him that he must groom somebody of his own blood, because I hadn't assured him that I will protect him when I become president. And that's another long story. But suffice to say that he asked me to endorse his brother, and I said no, and it meant a real hard time as vice president. I was completely sidelined. And on the 19th of November 2010, there was an assassination attempt on my life. I was traveling from the airport, but somehow my security had told me to switch cars. So they went and hit the car I was supposed to be in, but it was too bad I was in another car. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a year later, the president passed away. And that was on 5th of April, 2012. The Constitution of Malawi says that when a president passes away midway, the vice president shall take oath within 4 hours. It didn't happen. The body was smuggled out of Malawi. And Malawians were told that he didn't die. So the body was flown to South Africa, and it took 72 hours, 3 days, before the international community stepped up and pressurized that Malawi should observe what the Constitution says, and shall forever be grateful to the international community that worked with the army commander in Malawi to make sure that, one, I'm safe, and number two, that the Constitution is respected. So on the third day, I took oath and became the president of Malawi. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, when I came in, what I had gone through for the 3 days and the 2 years before that, and all the assassination attempt, the temptation and the pressure on me was to take revenge, was to make sure that I fight back all those people that had put me through that. But the beauty of leadership of women is that I decided that that was the time to rise and be exemplary. I made an announcement to the nation that there will be no revenge, there will be reconciliation, we shall move together into the future as one nation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, by the time the president died, the country was completely bankrupt. There was no fuel for 1 day. Fuel to take me to the funeral of my president was donated by the president of Zambia. Food for the people to eat at the funeral was donated by the president of Mozambique. So that was what I faced on day one. There's no fuel. Companies are operating at 35%. People are being laid off. The economy had just grown by 1.8%. And there was no food for 2 million people were food insecure when I started. The country was polarized. Even our relationship with Britain had been suspended. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the lessons I have learned is to engage the people that you serve. I believe that leadership is a love affair. You fall in love with the people and the people must fall in love with you. And if that is the case, you will put the people first and they will matter first. And you will engage them and you inform them. And you will make all decisions, tough or simple, based on their lives and in their best interest. So I did a few things. I wanted to demonstrate that I was going to take the lead. They told me on first day that I had a plane, a whole plane, called presidential jet, for me to travel in. I went into that jet, a whole sitting room. I said to myself, sell it. Sell it. I will not die if I travel in a commercial flights. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the second was salary. They told me all food was free. Everything in State House is free. I said, then why am I being paid a salary? I said, take 1/3 of my salary and donate it to an institution for people with disability. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, one thing about a woman leader is that you take risks. I decided, after I was elected by the European Union ambassador, that there was corruption that my predecessors had ignored to do something about. I made an announcement to the nation on the 7th of September 2013 that I was going to fight, that I was going to arrest anybody caught stealing public funds. I was warned by the perpetrators that they were going to bring me down. I was never going to be elected again. They were going to kill me. And I said to my husband, I am sincere that I am in love with Malawians, then they shall come first, and I shall arrest. And if the price is to leave State House or to be scandalized, I shall pay that price without any problem. It's a small price to pay. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I say this because I know that this is important. I always call upon my colleagues all over Africa that fighting corruption is going to be key on our continent to develop our nations. But I say that very much aware that it is not easy. You become scandalized. You become threatened. You are pushed out of office. But I always tell my fellow leaders that it is a small price to pay. Fortunately, there's a crop of leaders on the continent of Africa now that are standing up and saying no to corruption. And I ask the international community to stand with them and support them, because sometimes we get surprised that when that happens in Africa, when money is looted in Africa, the houses are not bought in Africa. The houses and the bank accounts are opened overseas. I spent my time as president and struggled to get that money back that had been looted and banked outside by my predecessor. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, finally, allow me to make recommendations. I believe that the issue of land, there must be political will on the continent of Africa. One, to make sure that our land issues are sorted out. The laws are passed to make sure that people are protected. Two, bad laws are repealed. There must be political will to increase budgets on women's programs. There must be political will to abolish harmful traditions against girls and women. There must be political will to fight corruption, as I said earlier. There must be political will to introduce new curricula for education. I belong to an organization called Think Equal that is advocating for the introduction of rights education from age 3. so that by the time any girl child is 9 or a boy child is 9, they are aware of their rights. Fortunately, I'm pleased to report that 117 schools across the world, starting with Sri Lanka, have signed up to introduce this curriculum on January 1. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would also call upon the African Union and the UN for quick response. Sometimes they wait too long until violence escalates and people die. And again, what disappoints me is that they are sacred cows. In other countries, leaders get away, they kill their people, and it looks like international institutions that should call them to be accountable look the other way. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I also would like to call upon international bodies and currently even local leaders to stop violence against women leaders. Madeleine Albright, as chair of NDI, this year in March, on International Women's Day, launched what we call the No Stop campaign to fight against abuses to women trying to stand for office in politics. It's not right, it's not fair. Unfortunately, the UN has acknowledged that there isn't much research on this. But we feel that globally now, women are being mistreated, they're being abused, they're being scandalized. And nobody is taking enough action against it. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, finally, I would like to report that I'm currently at the Woodrow Wilson Center, a joint fellowship with the Center for Global Development, researching on what can we do, what support can we provide for women leaders to increase the number of women leaders on the continent of Africa, and 2, researching on girls' education and looking at what is happening to the girl child between the ages of 0 to 10, all the harmful traditions, all the defilement, eating less than the boy child, all that treatment. Does it create an environment? Does it attract and inspire the girl child to go to school? These are the issues I'm fighting for, and I've decided that I'm going to fight until the job is done. But I'd like to end with a 2-minute story to say that there was an animal kingdom one time in Africa, and there was severe famine that year. And animals, thousands, in their thousands, were dying. This is a story my grandmother told me when I was 9 years old. And so the few animals that remained were flocking together looking for food. And as they walked down the stream, they saw smoke down the road. The giraffe told King Elephant, "Your Majesty, it looks like there's somebody cooking food where we are going." And King Elephant said, "That's not possible. There's no food in the wilderness." But as they approached the place, indeed they found the little hare with a lot of other animals boiling a big pot on fire. Whatever it is that they were cooking was boiling furiously. And so King Elephant asked the little hare. Meanwhile, the other animals were passing firewood to make sure the fire keeps burning. King Elephant asked the little hare, "So while all of us are starving, you have food and you're cooking food?" And little hare said, "No, Your Excellency. No, Your Majesty, I'm not cooking food. I'm boiling stones. I'm boiling stones because I believe that if I keep boiling these stones, one day they will turn into pumpkins." And King Elephant got angry, and all the animals started yelling at the little hare as they walked away. And little hare with firewood in his hands looked behind them and shouted, "Your Majesty, at least I'm doing something about the situation. Your Majesty, I'm boiling stones with the total belief that they will become pumpkins. But at least in the situation where we are in, at least I'm doing something about the situation." Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in this room, there are a few of us that are from Africa. There's Michelle, I know. There's my sister Edna. There's Pamela. At least we are doing something about the situation. And I would like to take this opportunity I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you that are sitting there, believing in us, passing on firewood, so that we can keep this fire burning. Because who knows, one day these stones shall turn into pumpkins. I'm grateful for the invitation. May God bless you.
I couldn't help but to think while you were talking, think about our situation in South Sudan, where women are still so far behind, actually right at the bottom of the league in the world table of where women should or could be. So in South Sudan, over 80% of women are illiterate, and only 10% of children actually finish primary education at present, and that could possibly be even less than that. So unlocking the potential of girls in South Sudan is something, as you know, we're very passionate about at Iba Girls Boarding School and the Friends of Iba Girls, the charity of which I am a patron. So from what you've been talking about, Madam President, what would you say were the biggest challenges, are the biggest challenges or the biggest barriers to the girl from the countryside, the girl with, like your friend, who did not have the finances to go to school? How could they overcome that challenges to be where you are today? Perhaps you could enlighten us a little bit by talking for a minute or so about your personal story on how you went from a child to becoming Africa's second only female president.
Thank you very much. I think maybe what I can just talk about is what I'm fighting for, not me. But I believe that in a very typical rural household, for the girl child, it starts from the day they say it's a girl, and for the next 10 years. And I say this because I know that there are all those here that can influence change that are not from Africa, that can help us think through this. What is happening globally now, as we aspire to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, is that for me, the supply side is okay. UNICEF is trying its best. There are 66 million of our children not going to school globally, but at least they are looking at girls must go to school, girls must have uniforms, feeding programs, school fees, sanitary pads, and things like that. My concern is to create the demand to inspire the household, a typical rural household, to want to send their girl child to school, to inspire the girl child to go to school, to want to go to school, and then to have the means to send that girl child to school. It is the traditions, the harmful traditions that are affecting our girl child. The injustice at household level. And unfortunately, when all that happens, nobody thinks it's wrong. For example, in Ghana, it is what they call the trokosh. Girls before 10 years old are taken and given away to high priests as sex slaves. In the rest of Africa, it will be between 0 and 10 genital mutilation. In Malawi, it will be the hyena. You all heard on BBC how grown men are given to young girls aged between 8 and 9 and have sex with them, believing that they are cleansing them. Now, unfortunately, grown men believe, which doctors have told them, that if they sleep with a girl between age 5 and 10, they will cleanse themselves of the virus. Number 5, it is the health issue. It is one is nutrition. The boy child eats with the father. The girl child eats with the mother. The men eat better, best, and most. The women eat less and least. So the girl child is a victim too. So the boy child, at a time when the brain is being developed, has an advantage over the girl child. So there's no way they can perform the same at school. And also, I am a victim. Why I'm very passionate about this is about deformities that take place when you're growing up. Just last week, another doctor confirmed that you have a lower back problem because you must have started carrying heavy stuff when you were 5 years old. And then the final one is the harmful traditions, the initiations, and all that. If we can deal with all this, then we give the girl child a better opportunity to compete, to go to school equally with the boy child. How can we do that? Number one, it is massive civic education. It's change of behavior change. And finally, the introduction of rights education from age 3, as we are proposing.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for this inspiring presentation.